Alrighty then, whenever anyone asks a legitimately sincere question or brings up a topic I thought people already understood, it can motivate me to make an entire video to answer it and evolve it. In this case, someone mentioned, Stomo, why do you go Gromp, Wolves, and then Blue? Isn't it better to go buff to buff? I know some of you know it, but I figure some of you don't, or even those that do know, don't understand why things are effective, just that they are. Anyhow, that encouraged me to make this video and also cover other jungle pathings, explain their benefits, and highlight things some people wouldn't even realize were there. It is no secret that Season 1 had an insane amount of pathing options to the point where deciding which one to take was one of the most important things you could do as a jungler. Fast forward to now, there are far less pathing choices than before, and they aren't as much of a death sentence either, but they still do offer tactical advantages. Anyhow, there are two forms of clearing that every jungler is readily exposed to. The level 3 clear, aka buff to buff, and the level 4 clear, which is dubbed the full clear. These are done in a straight line and are pretty much always serviceable. However, when I watch less experienced junglers play, this is where I see a big chunk of their faulty gameplay. Remember, the jungle is all about adapting your gameplay as you go. This begins with your clear and, while it won't sink your game like it did in Season 1, you should not forgo any tactical advantages. Let's look at the basic clear. Tons of inexperienced players get into the bad habit of starting the same exact way despite wanting to do something afterwards that isn't supported by it. Let's say you analyze that the best possible gank target is bottom lane. Well, if that's the case, you should probably try to start in the position opposite to it so you can lead into it after your first clear. Blue side, you can start with your blue buff and head downwards so you don't have to waste time doubling back and so forth. It's these type of basic observations that need to be done in order to maximize the potential of your jungle roots. With that said, most people know this, but this is for those that don't. Truthfully, most of the pathing tricks stem from this and are just variations of the straight line or loops. You'll see what I mean in a bit though. Before we continue with the pathing, I'll introduce a jungle pathing tidbit that is important to understand in order to maximize your sustain and clearing prowess. Should you focus the large monster in each camp or kill off the small ones? This gets brought up a lot and it honestly depends on the individual jungler. If the jungler can just kill the small monsters reasonably with splash damage or AoE, then just ignore them and let them naturally die. Someone like Cho'Gath, Gragas, and Amumu can just ignore the small monsters. If a jungler is largely single target, then quickly killing the small monsters so their damage doesn't tick away at you is a better idea. Most of these champions can kill the small monsters in 2 hits, while it will take several hits to kill the bigger monsters. Now back to the question that prompted this video. Why do I go Gromp to Wolves to Blue sometimes? To answer this better, think of why a person will think it's weak in the first place. You don't secure your buff immediately, you have to go back to Blue and thus waste time going backwards, then crossing the Wolves area again. This is all definitely true, but in truth it's a trade-off between time for more safety. Look at it a bit more carefully. Blue buff is definitely more powerful than Wolves, and doing it right after Gromp often means you don't have a smite available. You will have to fight the thing from full to zero, and many junglers, especially those with little sustain, may end up burning tons of resources there. This is where the benefits of this pathing variation kick in. By going to Wolves, you give the jungler some breathing room and let the following things happen. If they have natural sustain, they will get to use it to restore themselves without being strained. Let any potions they're drinking properly finish their duration so they can fight buff camps healthy. Let their smite return so they can use it to kill the buff camp faster and be able to contest it if there's an invasion attempt. Also helps if they need to restore mana. It lets your Gromp and Wolves have a more natural respawn, as the Wolves will now spawn at an appropriate time after Gromp. You basically trade your speed for all those benefits, and it is highly advised for some junglers who are very vulnerable and unsustained early. It gets a bit better though too. Even though you're technically spending time having to walk through dead camps, it allows your smite's cooldown to return as well. You can do the Raptor camp and then red buff with your smite off cooldown to gain the heal off the camp and use the safety of the smite to kill it faster and prevent a steal. Of course that means you didn't use smite for blue, so you traded mana for health, otherwise you can go to do Krugs and then red. Keep in mind that you can emulate this if you started red side too. Just do Krugs, Raptors, then red buff into Wolves, then blue or Gromp. It's the same kind of idea, but this one can be even more powerful for some junglers since they are better with the Krugs buff and the early heal is a tremendous boost to sustain. Anyhow, another jungle clearing tidbit. The use of the Scuttle Crab. At any point during your jungle clear, you can deviate and kill the Scuttle Crab. The thing doesn't fight back, although it does run away, and it gives you a small heal after you kill it alongside giving you some team vision. You can use this time to chug some potions and let their duration hit, kill it for its heal, or simply for the safe experience boost. A lot of players like to view them as a breather. They also play an important role in the next pathing strategy. This next pathing deviation is very powerful for control junglers, but it is a very risky maneuver against those capable of counter jungling. You start parallel to where your opposing jungler starts. Blue side red means you start red side blue, and you compare their buff camp respawn to yours. You clear that side of your jungle and then head to take the scuttle crab near you, invade and steal small camp, or attempt a gank even if it's half-hearted. The trick here is to delay taking your next buff by a minute or two in order to create a great disparity between the respawn for you and your opponent. You could technically have cleared the other side of the jungle and just left the camp up, but the idea is that you're trying to scout your opponent as much as possible. The benefits of this does not kick in until several minutes later. You know when your opponent's first buff is going to spawn because it should be the same time as yours, and you can plan ahead and try to be there to contest it. You should also know when your opponent's next buff camp should be spawning because you scouted and kept track, and you can contest that one too. All while this is happening, your opponent cannot take your first camp because you're in the way and would have likely fortified against it. They also can't take your other camp because you warped the respawn of it and it's likely not even there yet. They are forced to defend their own buff camp because that's the only thing they can't contest. Better yet, if you fail to steal theirs, yours will conveniently be respawning soon so you aren't as behind. To illustrate an example for this, your opponent is starting off at their red buff, so you start off on blue. You take blue and clear your side, then invade a bit while they're off doing their own blue. You keep track of the time and guess the respawn time for both camps. Hopefully your teammates gave you some vision on your red side. After a minute or two wandering around taking small camps, scuttle crabs, or performing some ganks, you finally take your own red buff. When the enemy red buff spawns, you can easily contest it. Your opponent has to defend it or abandon it, as the only other buff camp alive is your blue buff and they can't punch through you. If they try to contest it, you can kill them or waste too much of their time. Your opponent's blue buff now spawns and you go there to contest that one too. The same situation plays out, but your opponent can't try to steal yours since it doesn't even exist yet. If you happen to lose a contest, it's fine since you can just go get your newly respawning buff, or even if you die, there's nothing to steal, so it's not as bad as it could be for you. Anyhow, another clearing tidbit for you guys. This is probably one of the more often asked questions by the inexperienced, but it's something that makes a lot of sense when explained. Why do you move around when fighting the jungle camps? The mini kiting you do when fighting the camps is done, at least for melee champions, in hopes that you can cause the monsters to lose 1 or 2 attacks on you. For ranged champions, it's easier, but their range easily showcases how they can avoid damage from the monsters, but melees have less of a window of opportunity for this. Everything with animations has a mini channel time. The monster attack speed is basically a variation of that, and you can clearly see with their animation when they're going to actually hit you. During this time, you can do one of 2 things to minimize damage. Before they're about to actually make contact, you use a crowd control ability or a mitigation ability to nullify the damage before you're struck. This is most obvious with someone like Pantheon or Jax. As far as kiting as melee, the idea is to move right after you make contact but before the monster smacks you. This is in hopes of letting your auto attack animation refresh and forcing the monster to rewind their animation. It's quite easy for melee champions with abilities at least, but it can be tricky to consistently pull it off. The other pathing route is just a farm heavy one and generally better when you're fighting an opponent that isn't going to be all up in your face. It's also only recommended when you know your teammates aren't going to be needing your help. This is a pathing I don't always recommend since it's one of the few that has to sort of be preemptively taken, although it can be abandoned midway through if needed. It's also very vulnerable to counter jungling, so be very wary of that. Anyhow, it involves doing a full clear of the small camps for your initial clear and then doing a full straight clear right after. Where you start depends on where you want to end up with your acquired level 6. It's no brainer kind of path, but as I said, it's very effective at maximizing your experience, buff timers, and gold gains. It's also pretty damn good for those champions who just really need to get to level 6 as quickly as possible. Think of champions like a Moo, Malphite, and so on. Someone who needs their ultimate to do some really strong ganks. It also really helps with sustain for some junglers, as fighting the small camps initially is far easier for them than the buff camps, and the buff camps become laughably easy for them when they acquire all their abilities at level 3. Fun fact, this pathing existed in Season 1 as well. I had dubbed it the Superior Pathing, but it never really had an official name. It maximized your gold since you didn't burn as many potions since small camps were easy, and it helped power you through to level 5 and deal with duelists far easier. The question you might have for me now is this: which pathing is the best? Which one should I do? That again largely depends on what champions you're playing, who you're up against, and what kind of game plan you have. Use the video to give you something to build upon. By doing your own analysis and experimentation, you'll learn far more than me just telling you to take a sustained route with Jarvan, and better yet, we can avoid just repeating the problem of making people stick to one path. In essence, try these tactics yourself with your favorite champions and check to see if it improves your clearing and build on from that. This channel is supported by my sponsors, Crunchyroll and Loot Crate. Check out the description below for links to the websites. Signing up for any trials, including Crunchyroll's free anime trial, greatly supports my channel. Also remember to give the video a like to support the channel and subscribe if you haven't yet. I've also made a Patreon now, and if you wish to support me through that medium, then I welcome it.